Everybody, this is chapter 7, section 1. Title is Zero and Negative Exponents, starts on page 414. Moving into something completely different now, starting with chapter 7. Chapter 7 is all about exponents. There's going to be a long list of rules that you have to deal with when you're talking about exponents. If you do not remember how to calculate exponents from earlier in the year, you need to see me outside of class because we will not have time to cover how to calculate exponents again. So if you don't know that 2 to the third is the same thing as 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8, if you have no idea what any of that means, you need to see me outside of class so we can get you caught up. Okay? Now, 2 rules in today's lesson. First one, any number raised to the 0 power is equal to 1. And the only exception to that is the number 0. We'll talk about 0 to the 0 power in a second. But any other number, whether it's positive, negative, fraction, decimal, anything to the 0 power, the 0 exponent, is equal to 1. And here's some examples. 3 to the 0 power is 1. 10 to the 0 power is 1. 1 to the 0 power is 1. The only one that's not is 0 to the 0 power, and we'll call that one undefined. The other rule for this lesson deals with negative exponents, exponents that are negative numbers. If you have a negative exponent on the top of the problem, you move the whole thing to the bottom and change the exponent to become positive now. It's a lot easier to see that with an example. Okay? This is x to the negative 4th. A negative exponent needs to change places. So x to the negative 4th, that's really a whole number. So that's like x to the negative 4th over 1. So the x to the negative 4th is on top of a fraction. A negative exponent means you need to switch places. So instead of being on the top, I need to rewrite it so that x to the 4th is now on the bottom. Notice, I started with an exponent of negative 4, but after I moved it, the negative sign goes away. So I have 1 over x to the positive 4th. Okay? If you have a negative exponent on the bottom of a problem, you move the entire part up to the top and change the exponent to positive again. So if you have something on the bottom, there's a 2 on the top, and the x to the negative 3rd is on the bottom. If you have a negative exponent on the bottom, you take this whole part, move it up to the top, and instead of negative, it becomes positive now. Okay? So a negative exponent means that that part of the problem has to change places. If it's on the top, negative exponent makes it move to the bottom. If it's on the bottom, negative exponent makes it move to the top. Here's some examples using those 2 rules. Now, these directions say simplify each expression. Simplify just means do as much as you can. For most of these, you're not going to get just a 1-number answer like 12 or 17 or 32. Right? You're going to try to simplify them. We will talk more a little bit later about what it means to actually be simplified. For now, just try to figure out if there's any way that I can use those 2 rules that we just talked about with 0 exponents and with negative exponents. Here's the first one. 4 to the negative 3rd. Now, that's a whole number, so it's really over 1, which means it's on top of a fraction. Since I have a negative exponent, it means I have to move that to the bottom of a fraction. So instead of top, it's going to go to the bottom. And don't forget, when it changes places, it also changes signs. So instead of a negative 3, now I have a positive 3. Do I have anything left to leave up on top? The only thing I had on top was a 4 to the negative 3rd. I moved that. If there's nothing else up there, what I write is a 1. So I have 1 over 4 to the 3rd. Now, The last thing you always have to do when you're trying to figure out how to simplify an expression is there any more math I can do? If you look on your cheat sheet, step 8 says the more math rule. If there's any more calculations that you can do, then do them. Now, I can do 4 to the third power. Grab my calculator. 4 to the third power is 64. So the answer to this is 1 on top, 64 on the bottom. So this problem had 2 steps. Take the negative exponent, move that part to the bottom, and then I had to do more math. So if you're looking at your cheat sheet, this was step 6 and step 8. Now, there's parentheses are really important in this section. Okay? We'll talk about why here. This is negative 5 to the 0 power. Well, we know that anything to the 0 power is 1. Okay? So I know that my answer here is going to be 1. Because anything to the 0 power is 1. That is rule 7 on your cheat sheet. This one, 3 to the negative second, similar to question A. Negative exponent means it goes to the bottom and becomes positive. I don't have anything else left to stay on the top, so I put a 1 there. So that was step 6, the negative exponent rule. Now I have to do the more math rule. 3 to the second is 9, so my answer is 1 over 9. Now, here's where the parentheses become important. This is not the number negative 3 to the 0 power. This is 3 to the 0 power with a negative sign in front of it. Notice in part B, the negative 5 has parentheses around it. In part D, that negative sign is not in parentheses with 3, so the negative sign is separate. Okay? So what I have to do in this one is 3 to the 0 power is 1. The negative sign, since it's not in parentheses with the 3, just comes along into my answer. So, parentheses to the 0 power, we get 1, like in letter B. No parentheses to the 0 power, you're going to get negative 1. 3 to the 0, and then you're going to stick a negative sign in front of it. Parentheses are super, super important. Here we have negative 4 to the negative second power. Okay? So, the negative exponent means I have to switch it to the bottom. So I have negative 4 to the positive second now, because when I move it from top to bottom or bottom to top, it changes the sign. I took everything I had to the bottom. There's nothing left on the top, so I put a 1. So that's step 6, the negative exponent rule. Now I have to do more math. Negative 4 squared, that means negative 4 times negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4 is positive 16. So I get 1 over 16. You'll have some of these on the next screen for practice problems. Remember, you're working with the negative exponent rule, you're working with the 0 exponent rule, and you're working with the more math rule, 6, 7, and 8. Pay attention to those parentheses when you do these 5 practice problems. Letters A and B look the same. One of them has parentheses, one of them doesn't. That's going to affect your answer. Next idea. Everything that we looked at so far either had one number or one letter in it. Right? If you have an expression with more than one variable or digit, first identify how many variables or digits there are. I'll explain that in a second. We're going to call each variable and digit a part of the problem. Then identify what the exponent is on each one of those parts. After you identify what each exponent is, figure out what needs to be done with each part. Now, there's a lot of steps there. This is just reminding you, the directions say simplify each expression. The expression is simplified if you have no negative exponents in the final answer, no 0 exponents in the final answer, and no more math that you can do. These 3 steps right here these three little rules, that's going to be true for every section in this chapter. Okay? That's how you know when you're done with the problem. It looks okay so far, but we're going to get to problems that have to use 7 or 8 of these steps that are on your cheat sheet. How do you know when you can stop? This right here, this is when you know you can stop. You can't have any negatives, no zeros, and there's no more math that you can do. Okay? That part right there will make more sense when we get into later sections and there's more difficult problems. So again, simplify each expression. What we said on the previous screen is we have to figure out how many parts there are. Well, example 2a has 3 bases, or 3 parts. There's the 4, the c, and the b. Okay? Now, I know what the exponent is on the c, -3. I know that the exponent on b is a 2. But 4 doesn't have an exponent. Anything that doesn't have an exponent is really a 1. Okay? Now, all 3 of those parts have exponents. Now I need to figure out what to do with them. Okay? The 4 to the first, that's positive, so it's going to stay where it is. And right now it's on top, so I'm going to leave it on top. C to the -3rd, that has a negative exponent, so it needs to switch from the top to the bottom. And when it switches to the bottom, the 3 turns into a positive. The b to the 2nd is on the top. It has a positive exponent, so it stays on the top. The only other thing I can do, 4 to the 1st power is really just the same thing as 4. So I don't need that exponent there in my final answer. 4b to the 2nd, c to the 3rd. There's the answer for 2a. Now, how do I know that I'm done? Remember those 3 things. Do I have any negative exponents? No. Do I have any 0 exponents? No. Is there any more math I can do? No. That means I'm done. 2b, I have x to the -9th. Negative exponent means take that part and switch places, so it goes from the top to the bottom, and it becomes positive. I took everything I had to the bottom, there's nothing left, so there's a 1 on the top. There's no more math, there's no negatives, there's no zeros, so I'm done with that one. In 2c, we have a negative exponent, but the negative exponent is on the bottom. Remember? Negative doesn't always just mean move it to the bottom. It means switch places. So if it starts on the bottom, it has to move up to the top. Okay? So the 1 has a positive 1 exponent. So it's going to stay on the top. N to the -3rd, the -3 tells me to move it to the top since it started on the bottom. So now the 1 and the n are both on the top. And then there's a little bit more math I can do, because 1 to the 1st power is just 1. Do I really have to multiply something by 1, though? No, it's the same thing as whatever it is. So I don't have to multiply by 1. So the simplest way to write this is just n to the 3rd power. Okay. 2d, 2 to the 3rd power, and a to the -4th. 2 to the 3rd has a positive exponent, so it's going to stay on the top. It's going to stay where it is. A to the -4th, that's a negative exponent. Negative exponent means switch places. So it moves from the bottom up to the top, and it becomes positive. Okay. No negative exponents left, no 0 exponents left. Is there more math I can do? Sure, I can plug 2 to the 3rd power into my calculator and get 8a to the 4th. That would be my final answer for that one. Letter E. I have n to the -5th on top, m to the 2nd on the bottom. So n to the -5th, negative exponent, means that it's to switch places. So the n switches to the bottom and becomes positive. The m to the 2nd is positive. Positive exponent means stay where it is. It started on the bottom, it's going to stay on the bottom. There's nothing else for me to put on top because I moved the n out of the way, so all I have left is a 1. 1 n to the 5th, m to the 2nd. Handful of those for you to try. Same rules. Don't forget, negative exponents, switch places. Zero exponents, that turns into a 1. And look for more math that you can do. Last new thing in this section, we have seen the word directions evaluate before. Evaluate means plug in and solve. It's a little bit different in this section. Okay? When you evaluate in this chapter, simplify the expressions first, just like we did in example 2. Once we're as simple as we can, then plug in your numbers and solve. So, for example, there's a couple here. It says evaluate the expressions for n equals -2 and w equals 3. So we're going to do everything we can first to our expressions and plug in our numbers last. Right? So, n to the -4th, w to the 0. N to the -4th, it's a negative exponent, which means it has to switch places. So it moves from the top to the bottom and becomes positive. W to the 0. What's anything to the 0 power? Anything to the 0 power is 1. The W is on top, so the 1 stays on top. My answer is 1 over n to the 4th. Now I need to evaluate, so I have to plug in my n equals -2. Once again, anytime you substitute in a negative number, put it in parentheses. We said already once that parentheses are super important in this section. Okay? There's a difference between what I just wrote, -2 to the 4th power, and this. That is something different. The parentheses mean something there. It tells you whether or not that negative sign comes along with the rest of your problem. So here, -2 to the 4th power means take -2 and multiply it together 4 times. -2 times -2 times -2 times -2. Many people, again, when they're dealing with exponents, they think that's just multiply. -2 times 4, which would be -8. No, that's not what this means. It means that I have 4 -2's. So, -2, -2, -2, -2 is positive 16. So my answer is 1 over 16. 3b, n to the -1st over w to the 2nd. The n to the -1st is a negative exponent, so it has to switch from the top to the bottom, and it becomes positive. W to the 2nd is positive, so it stays where it is. There's nothing left for me to put on the top. I moved everything out of the way, so there's a 1 left. That's all I can do here, so now I have to plug in my numbers. The n is -2 from my directions. The w is 3. So 1 on top, -2 to the 1st power, which means I have 1 -2 in my problem. 3 to the 2nd power is 3 times 3, which is 9. -2 times 9 is -18. So I get 1 over -18. Let's try the next two. N to the 0 in 3c turns into a 1. Stays on top. W to the 6th. W to the 6th is a positive exponent, so it stays where it is. Stays on the bottom. That's all I can simplify, so now I have to plug in my numbers. W is 3. Grab my calculator. 3 to the 6th power is 729. So my answer is 1 over 729. Next problem. There's a 1, there's an n, there's a w. I know the exponent on the w is a negative 1. The n doesn't have an exponent, so what can I write there? I write a 1, right? What's the exponent on the 1 on top of the problem? It's also a positive 1. The 1 has a positive exponent, so it stays where it is. The n has a positive exponent, so it stays where it is. The w has a negative exponent, so it switches places. It moves to the top, and it goes from a negative 1 to a positive 1. Now, plug in my numbers. 1 to the first power is 1. W is 3. So I have 3 to the first power. N is negative 2. So it's negative 2 to the first power. More math. 3 to the first power is just 3. 3 times 1 gives me a 3 on the top. Negative 2 to the first power is negative 2. So my answer is negative 3/2. Four of those practice problems for you, remember, our 3 rules. Negative exponents, 0 exponents, more math. Paragraph at the bottom. Each section in this chapter will add more and more steps to these types of problems. It's important that you do all of the steps and do them in the correct order. You will have a list that you can use throughout the chapter with the steps written in correct order. And that's the cheat sheet I gave you. Make sure you hang on to that. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, make sure you write them down. Like I said earlier, these steps will keep coming back in every single lesson in this chapter. If there is anything you're not sure about, ask it now or else you're going to miss it in the next section and the next section and the next section. Don't fall behind. Get things taken care of right away.